It was supposed to be a normal Saturday afternoon in the suburbs. The kind of afternoon where kids' laughter floated through the air, sprinklers clicked against green lawns, and barbecue smoke curled from backyards. But on this street, peace was about to be shattered. Because in this wealthy, picture-perfect neighborhood, one man carried himself like a king, an whole president who thought the rules didn't just govern lawns and mailboxes, but people. And that man was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. See, that afternoon, 12-year-old Jamal was riding his bike along the sidewalk, smiling, free. The air was hot, cicadas buzzing in the trees, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. His sneakers were scuffed, his laugh genuine. He wasn't hurting anyone, just being a kid. But the whole president, Richard Crowley, didn't see a kid. He didn't see innocence, or youth, or joy. No, he saw something else. Something ugly twisted inside him. He saw a black boy where he didn't think one belonged. "Hey!" Richard's voice cracked through the still air like a whip. Jamal hit the brakes. Tires squealed against the pavement. His heart skipped. Slowly, he turned his head. Richard stood at the end of his driveway, arms folded, jaw tight, a golf cap shadowing his sharp eyes. "You can't ride here," Richard barked. "This isn't your street." Jamal blinked. His throat felt dry. "But my friend lives down there," he said softly, pointing toward Malik's house 2 doors down. Richard's lip curled. "Don't lie to me, boy. I know who lives here." His voice grew harder, sharper. "I said, get out." And before Jamal could pedal away, before he could even process the venom in those words, Richard moved. Fast. Too fast for a man his age. He stormed forward, grabbed the handlebars, and shoved. The bike twisted. Jamal toppled, skin scraping against concrete. He gasped in pain as his elbow burned raw. His palms stung. His breath caught in his chest. Richard loomed over him, his voice low but vicious. "We don't want troublemakers in this neighborhood. You hear me?" Jamal's chest tightened with fear. He wanted to run, but his legs trembled. His hands shook as he pushed himself up. His eyes stung, not just from the pain, but from the humiliation. This wasn't just about a bike ride anymore. It was about dignity. Neighbors peeked through blinds. Curtains twitched. Nobody stepped out. Nobody said a word. Silence weighed heavy. Complicit, cowardly silence. Jamal managed to whisper, "I'm not causing trouble. I just wanted to see my friend." Richard leaned closer, his breath hot, reeking of coffee and arrogance. "Don't test me, kid. I run this place. You stay out, or next time, it won't just be a scrape." Those words cut deep, a threat against a child. And that should have been the end. Richard thought he had scared him off. He thought he had buried the moment beneath fear and power. But what Richard Crowley didn't know was who Jamal really was. Because Jamal wasn't just any child. He was the son of the director of the FBI. And that attack, the shove, the scrape, the humiliation, it wasn't going to vanish. It wasn't going to be forgotten. It was going to explode. But in this first moment, as Jamal picked up his bike, fighting tears, clutching his scraped elbow, all he could think about was escape. He pedaled away fast, the sting of gravel still burning against his skin, Richard's shadow still heavy in his mind. What Jamal didn't realize yet, what Richard couldn't even begin to imagine, was that this single act of hatred was about to unravel everything. Careers, reputations, power structures, even lives. The neighborhood thought it was quiet, safe, untouchable. But the truth was about to crash through those white fences and manicured lawns like thunder. Because you don't put your hands on a black child and walk away free. And when you attack the son of the FBI director, justice doesn't just knock, it kicks the door down. The house at the edge of Oak Ridge Estates didn't look any different from the rest. White siding, black shutters, a porch swing that creaked in the summer breeze. But inside lived a family that carried a different kind of weight. Jamal's father, Director Marcus Henderson, wasn't just any parent. He wasn't just another tired dad in a polo shirt mowing the lawn on weekends. He was the man who led the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a man who had stood in briefing rooms with presidents, stared down foreign adversaries, and held the power to mobilize thousands at the snap of a command. But to Jamal, he was just dad. The one who helped him with his math homework, who grilled burgers in the backyard, who told him, "Son, you walk tall. No matter who tries to push you down, you walk tall." That Saturday, Marcus had come home early, exhausted but grateful. His black SUV pulled into the driveway, tires crunching over the gravel. He stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, his suit jacket draped over one arm. He looked like a man who carried the world on his back, but his eyes softened the moment they fell on his son. Jamal was sitting on the porch steps, shoulders slumped, his scraped elbow wrapped in a paper towel. His bike leaned against the railing, one handlebar bent. Marcus froze. "Jamal, what happened?" The boy's lips trembled. He tried to speak, but the words caught. A single tear slid down his cheek. Marcus crouched low, eye level with his son. His voice, calm but steady, carried that fatherly mix of concern and command. "Talk to me, son. Who did this?" Jamal swallowed hard. It was Mr. Crowley, the man down the street. He said I don't belong here. He pushed me off my bike. His voice cracked on the last words. For a long second, silence hung heavy between them. Marcus's jaw tightened. His eyes, usually warm, went cold. The kind of cold that made even seasoned agents flinch in a briefing room. He straightened slowly, standing tall again. He wasn't just dad now. He was the director. "Stay here," he said quietly. "I'll be right back." Jamal's voice wavered. "Dad, please, don't make it worse." Marcus turned his head, gave a small, reassuring nod. "I don't make things worse, son. I make them right." Meanwhile, 2 doors down, Richard Crowley was in his garage polishing his golf clubs. Smug satisfaction etched across his face. To him, it was just another small victory in maintaining order in his neighborhood. He was the self-appointed guardian of Oak Ridge Estates. He didn't hear Marcus approach until the heavy shadow stretched across his driveway. Richard looked up, frowning. "Can I help you?" Marcus's voice was steady, but there was steel underneath. "You laid hands on my son." Richard blinked, then smirked. "Oh, that kid? Yeah, he was loitering, riding around like he owned the place. I told him to move along." "Move along?" Marcus's tone cut like glass. "You shoved him off his bike. He's 12 years old." Richard shrugged, as if swatting away a fly. "Kids exaggerate. Besides, we have rules here. I'm the HOA president, and I don't let troublemakers run wild." Marcus stepped closer. His presence was overwhelming, calm, controlled, but undeniably powerful. "You don't get to put your hands on my child. Not here. Not anywhere." Richard chuckled bitterly. "Oh, I get it. You're one of those parents. Think your kid can do no wrong. Well, newsflash. Rules are rules. Maybe he should learn some respect." Marcus's eyes narrowed, but his voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You don't even know who you're talking to." Richard leaned back against his workbench, arrogance radiating off him. "I don't need to know. I run this neighborhood. Doesn't matter if you're black, white, or purple, you follow my rules." His lip curled. "But let's be honest, you people always think the rules don't apply to you." And there it was, the venom behind the mask. Marcus inhaled slowly, holding back the fury that burned in his chest. Years of training had taught him control, patience, precision. But this wasn't an international crisis. This wasn't a calculated threat from overseas. This was personal. He took one step closer, voice dropping to a razor's edge. "You don't lay a finger on my son again. You so much as look at him wrong, and I promise you, you'll regret it." Richard laughed, shaking his head. "What are you gonna do? Call the cops?" "Please. Half of them are my golfing buddies. You think anyone's gonna take your word over mine? You're just another angry black man." Marcus's eyes didn't flicker. His silence was louder than any shout. He turned on his heel, started walking away. Richard called after him, smug and careless. "Yeah, that's what I thought. Go home. Teach your kid to stay where he belongs." But what Richard didn't realize was that Marcus Henderson wasn't just any father. He wasn't just another homeowner. He was the man who could put Richard's entire life under a microscope. Every tax return, every bank account, every secret. And Marcus had just made a silent vow. This wasn't over. Back at the Henderson house, Jamal sat at the kitchen table, staring at his scraped elbow. His mother, Angela, dabbed antiseptic gently, her touch soft, her eyes full of fire. "He did what?" she whispered, voice trembling with fury. Marcus walked in, loosened his tie, and set his jacket over the chair. His face was calm, but his hands were clenched. Angela met his eyes. "We're not letting this go." Marcus nodded once. "We won't. Not now. Not ever." Outside, the neighborhood looked the same. Lawns trimmed, kids playing, sprinklers hissing in the summer heat. But something had shifted. Something was brewing. Because when a man like Richard Crowley lays hands on a child like Jamal Henderson, it doesn't stay buried. It doesn't stay quiet. It sparks a storm. By Sunday morning, Oak Ridge Estates was buzzing. Word of the incident had slipped through the grapevine. Neighbors whispered in driveways. Text chains lit up, and half-truths twisted faster than wildfire. "Did you hear? That new family's kid was causing trouble. I heard Richard had to stop him from vandalizing." No, Richard said the boy got aggressive first. The truth was already being buried under lies. And Richard was the one holding the shovel. At the Ho clubhouse, Richard gathered his allies. 3 board members who were more interested in their property values than the truth. They sat around the long oak table, sipping coffee, nodding along as Richard spun his story. "He came riding through like he owned the place," Richard said, voice sharp with fake outrage. "Disrespectful. Dangerous. You should have seen the look in his eye, like he was ready to attack me. I had no choice but to stop him." One board member, Susan, frowned. "He's 12, Richard." Richard waved dismissively. "Age doesn't matter. If we don't set boundaries now, what's next? Spray paint? Break-ins? I'm telling you, this kid is trouble." The others muttered agreement. Nobody wanted conflict. Nobody wanted headlines. And Richard knew how to play that fear. But outside that clubhouse, Marcus Henderson was already moving. Monday morning, Marcus sat in his office at FBI headquarters in D.C. Papers spread across his desk, screens glowing with classified intelligence. But his focus wasn't on international threats or cyber breaches. His focus was on one man, Richard Crowley. He had pulled Richard's file, tax records, employment history, property deeds, even old civil complaints buried in county court. And what Marcus saw made his jaw tighten. Richard wasn't just arrogant. He was dirty. Shady business dealings, misused HOA funds, a harassment claim that had been quietly settled years earlier. Marcus leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about justice. And Richard had just stepped into a storm he couldn't comprehend. Back in Oak Ridge, Richard strutted like nothing was wrong. He mowed his lawn, waved at passing cars, and grinned at neighbors as if he hadn't shoved a 12-year-old onto the pavement. But behind that grin, a gnawing unease lingered. That mysterious text message still haunted him. "We need to talk about what you did today." Who sent it? A neighbor? The kid's parents? Or was someone bigger watching? He poured another glass of bourbon, trying to drown the thought. By Tuesday afternoon, the first confrontation boiled over again. Jamal was walking home from school, backpack heavy on his shoulders, when Richard's SUV slowed to a crawl beside him. The tinted window rolled down. "You again," Richard sneered. "Didn't I tell you to stay out of here?" Jamal froze, heart thudding. He wanted to run, but before he could, Marcus's black SUV pulled in behind. The door swung open, and Marcus stepped out, imposing, calm, a storm bottled inside. "Richard," he said evenly, "we need to have a word." Richard smirked, but his grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Oh, I don't think so. I've already spoken to the board. We're filing a complaint about your kid. Riding bikes where he doesn't belong. Disturbing the peace." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Disturbing the peace?" He gestured to his son. "He's a child. You attacked him." Richard barked a laugh. "Attacked? Please. Don't play the victim card with me. I've got witnesses. Everyone around here knows what really happened." Jamal's voice trembled. "That's not true." Richard cut him off. "Quiet, boy. Adults are talking." Marcus's jaw flexed, but his voice stayed measured. "You don't ever tell my son to be quiet. You don't ever dismiss his voice." "Or what?" Richard snapped. "You'll run to the cops?" "Go ahead. Like I said, they're my friends. I'll have them at your door before sundown." And almost on cue, the sound of sirens wailed in the distance. Jamal's stomach dropped. Red and blue lights flickered against the street as a squad car pulled up. 2 officers stepped out, hands resting casually on their belts. Richard's grin widened. "See, right on time." The lead officer, a tall man with mirrored sunglasses, looked between them. "What's the problem here?" Richard jumped in fast. "Officer, thank God you're here. This man's kid has been causing trouble all over the neighborhood. I confronted him, and now they're harassing me." Marcus opened his mouth, but the officer held up a hand. "Sir, calm down. We'll get your side in a minute." His tone carried an edge that wasn't neutral. It was skeptical. Jamal's throat tightened. He'd seen this look before, on TV, in stories whispered by older cousins. That look that said, "They don't see us the same way." Marcus's voice was calm, but it carried authority. "My son was attacked by this man. I want to file an official report." The officer shifted uncomfortably. "Look, let's not make this bigger than it is. Why don't we all go our separate ways and keep the peace?" Richard smirked like he'd already won. But Marcus stepped forward, eyes locked on the officer. His voice dropped low, commanding. "Do you know who I am?" The officer hesitated. Should I?" Marcus reached into his wallet, pulled out a badge. Not just any badge. The seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation glinted in the sunlight. "I am Marcus Henderson," he said evenly, "Director of the FBI. And you're standing here while a grown man admits to laying hands on a child. My child. You'll take this report. You will document it properly, or we'll be having a very different conversation at your precinct tomorrow." The officer's face paled. His partner shifted nervously. Richard's grin faltered. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. For the first time, the balance of power had shifted, and Richard felt it. That night, Richard paced his living room, glass shaking in his hand. His phone buzzed again. Same number, same unknown sender. This time, the message was longer. "You thought this would disappear. It won't. Every move you make is being watched. Stop before you lose everything." Richard's heart pounded. He looked out the window into the darkness, blinds half closed, paranoia crawling up his spine. Was it Marcus? Was it someone else? Or was his past finally catching up to him? Either way, he was rattled, and a rattled man makes mistakes. By Wednesday morning, Richard Crowley had convinced himself he wasn't afraid. Sure, that FBI badge rattled him, and those strange text messages kept his nerves on edge. But in his mind, Marcus Henderson was just another loud black man trying to play the victim. Richard believed he had the advantage. The whole board, the neighborhood gossip, even the local cops. So when he marched into the HOA office with his folder full of evidence, he carried himself like a man ready for war. Inside, the board members sat stiffly around the long table. They'd heard whispers. They'd seen the patrol car parked outside Marcus's house the night before, and they weren't sure they wanted to be caught in the crossfire. Richard slapped a folder onto the table. "This," he declared, "is everything we need to deal with the Henderson family. Complaints from neighbors, photographs, records of their kid trespassing. They're a problem. and were shutting them down. He pulled out a photo of Jamal on his bike, snapped from across the street. Another of Angela unloading groceries. Another of Marcus walking the dog at night. All taken by Richard himself. The room went quiet. Finally, Susan, the board member with the sharp eyes, spoke. "Richard, this looks like surveillance, not complaints." Richard scoffed. "It's documentation, evidence. When they try to sue us, we'll have proof." But even as he spoke, something in the room shifted. Doubt, unease, fear. Because while Richard saw power in those photos, everyone else saw obsession. Across the neighborhood, in the Henderson home, Marcus sat at his dining room table, laptop open. His team at the bureau had quietly pulled more on Richard. Financial records, HOA audits, even emails flagged from a whistleblower. And the picture was ugly. Richard had been siphoning HOA funds for years, funneling maintenance fees into his personal accounts, overbilling for landscaping, even pocketing kickbacks from contractors. On paper, it was embezzlement. In reality, it was theft from every neighbor who trusted him. Angela read over Marcus's shoulder, fury in her eyes. So while he's out there harassing children, he's been stealing from the very people he claims to protect. Marcus's jaw tightened. That's the kind of hypocrisy that doesn't survive the light. He picked up his phone and made a call. Put a team on Crowley. Full surveillance. Discreet. I want everything. Calls, movements, contacts. He doesn't sneeze without us knowing. Angela raised a brow. You're really going after him? Marcus's voice was steady, unshakable. He laid hands on my son. He thinks the rules don't apply to him. But rules? They're my business. And Crowley's about to learn exactly how small he is. That afternoon, Richard decided to escalate. He called the local precinct, demanding a meeting with the chief. This man's a threat to our neighborhood, he hissed into the phone. I don't care if he's FBI. He's intimidating me, my board, my family. You need to protect us. The chief agreed to meet. But what Richard didn't know was that the FBI had already contacted the same precinct, quietly reminding them that Marcus Henderson wasn't just a resident. He was the director. So when Richard arrived, puffed up with self-importance, the chief's smile was polite but tight. Richard, the chief said slowly, maybe this is something you want to let go. It's complicated. Richard slammed his hand on the desk. Complicated? He's harassing me. He's using his position to scare me into silence. The chief leaned back, folding his hands. Silence about what? Richard froze. His throat tightened. For a moment, he saw it. The trap. The way the chief's eyes studied him. The way the recorder light blinked faintly on the desk. But pride was louder than fear. You think I'm scared of him? Richard spat. That man doesn't belong here. Neither does his kid. And I don't care if he runs the FBI. I'll make sure everyone knows it. The chief didn't reply. He just let the words hang in the air, damning and irreversible. That night, Richard stumbled home, angry, half drunk, muttering to himself. He didn't see the black sedan parked down the street. He didn't notice the man in a dark suit speaking quietly into an earpiece. The Hendersons had eyes on him now. Every move documented, every word recorded. And still, Richard couldn't stop himself. He called an emergency home meeting, sending out mass emails and text blasts to every neighbor. Urgent. Community safety crisis. Attend immediately. By 8 p.m., the clubhouse was full. Dozens of residents crowded inside, murmuring nervously. Richard stood at the front, chest puffed, folder in hand. These people, he began, pointing toward Marcus's house through the window, are destroying our community. Their kid disrespects us. The father uses his power to intimidate us. And if we don't stand up now, Oak Ridge Estates will never be the same. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, others frowned. But before Richard could launch into his slideshow of evidence, the doors opened. Marcus walked in. Not in a suit, not flanked by agents. Just a father, in jeans and a polo, calm but radiating authority. The room fell silent. Richard's face turned red. "What are you doing here?" Marcus didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his voice steady, measured, carrying across the room. "I'm here because my son was attacked. I'm here because lies are spreading through this neighborhood like poison. And I'm here because the man standing at this podium thinks he's untouchable." Gasps rippled. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Marcus held up a folder, thicker than Richard's. But the truth always wins. And the truth about Richard Crowley is darker than any of you realize. Richard's jaw clenched. "Don't you dare." Marcus cut him off, his voice like thunder now. "For years, he has stolen from you, embezzled your fees, lied about repairs, lined his pockets while you paid the bills. And when my son crossed his path, he lashed out like a coward." He laid the folder on the table. Pages of documents, bank records, emails, proof. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Richard staggered, face pale. That's not true. He's making it up." But Marcus's gaze didn't waver. "This is just the beginning. Every authority you've ever feared is about to know your name. And you brought it on yourself." The clubhouse meeting shattered Oak Ridge Estates. By the next morning, whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were full-blown conversations on porches, in driveways, at the local coffee shop. "Did you see the papers Henderson dropped? I always wondered why the whole fees kept going up." If this is true, Richard could be in serious trouble. Richard Crowley's empire of control, built on fear, arrogance, and gossip, was crumbling. But instead of backing down, Richard doubled down. He woke up furious, pacing his kitchen, phone pressed to his ear. "Listen, I need statements, witnesses, anyone willing to back me up. This guy is trying to ruin me, and I'm not going down without a fight." On the other end, one board member stammered, "Richard, maybe it's time to step aside. If what Marcus said is true." Richard slammed his fist against the counter. "It's not true. He's twisting everything. I'm the victim here. Don't you see that?" But his voice cracked on the last word, and even he knew it sounded hollow. Meanwhile, at the Henderson home, a different kind of preparation was unfolding. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, Jamal beside him, Angela across. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting long stripes across the papers spread out before them. Bank statements, email chains, whole contracts, all now part of a carefully built case. Angela tapped her pen against the table. "You've got him dead to rights. But what's the next step? Court? Media? Both?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Both. But timing matters. He's still dangerous, still unpredictable. We don't just want him exposed. We want him unable to hurt anyone else again." Jamal shifted in his seat. "Dad?" Marcus softened. "Yeah, son?" Jamal's eyes were serious, older than 12 in that moment. "When he pushed me, I felt small, like I didn't matter. I don't want anyone else to feel like that. Not ever." Marcus reached across the table, placing a steady hand on his son's. "And they won't. That's why we fight. Not for revenge, for dignity, for justice." Angela's eyes shimmered with pride. Later that day, allies began to emerge. Susan, the board member with the sharp eyes, knocked on the Hendersons' door. She stood nervously on the porch, wringing her hands. But when Marcus opened the door, her voice was firm. "I saw the documents," she said, "and I've suspected for a while. Richard's been manipulating the board, threatening us, making sure we never look too close. If you need a witness, I'll stand with you." Marcus gave a small nod. "Thank you. People like you make all the difference." She exhaled, relieved, as if a weight had lifted from her shoulders. "You're not the only one he's bullied." But Richard wasn't sitting still. That evening, he gathered a small group of his loyalists in his living room. Faces tight, voices low. They whispered about taking back control. "He can't just walk in here and smear your name," one said. "You've done so much for this community." Another added. Richard soaked it up, his pride reigniting. "Exactly. They need me. Without me, this place falls apart." Marcus Henderson thinks he can scare us, but he's wrong. I've got friends, connections, and if I have to play dirty to protect what's mine, so be it. One of the men shifted uneasily. What do you mean by dirty? Richard's grin was cold. You'll see. That same night, Jamal was lying in bed when headlights swept across his window. He sat up, heart racing, peeking through the blinds. A figure stood across the street, still, watching. It was Richard. Even in the dim light, Jamal recognized the silhouette, the stiff posture, the golf cap pulled low. The man didn't move for a long time, just stood there. Jamal's chest tightened. He wanted to call for his parents, but before he could, the figure turned and slipped into the shadows. The next morning, Jamal told Marcus. His father's expression didn't change, but his jaw clenched, eyes narrowing. He's crossing lines he can't uncross, Marcus said softly. Angela shivered. He's unraveling. By Friday, the neighborhood was a powder keg. Half the residents had turned against Richard, demanding his resignation. The other half clung to his promises, convinced he was the only thing keeping order. Arguments broke out at the mailbox. Shouts echoed across lawns. What started as one man's cruelty toward a child had become a full-blown community war. And at the center, Marcus waited, calculating, preparing. He wasn't rushing. He knew timing was everything. Richard was spiraling, making mistakes, revealing who he really was. And soon it would all come crashing down. That evening, Marcus received a call. A reporter from the local news station had caught wind of the story. Director Henderson, off the record. We've heard there was an altercation between your son and the HOA president. Is it true? Marcus paused, then answered carefully. What's true will come out in due time. But I'll tell you this. When a man abuses power, no matter how small or large, justice finds him. The reporter's voice was eager. Are you saying there's more to this story? Marcus's lips curved into a faint, grim smile. Much more. Meanwhile, Richard sat alone in his darkened living room, blinds drawn, drink in hand. His phone buzzed again. Same number. This time, the message cut deeper than ever. The FBI doesn't need to ruin you, Richard. You're doing that yourself. Tomorrow, it ends. His hand shook as he set the phone down. He looked at his reflection in the black screen. Sweat on his forehead, eyes bloodshot, fear creeping in. Tomorrow. The word echoed in his mind like a death sentence. Saturday morning arrived like a storm. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds, as if the weather itself knew what was coming. The quiet suburban street of Oak Ridge Estates didn't feel so quiet anymore. Unmarked cars lined the block, their tinted windows reflecting the trembling curtains of curious neighbors peeking out. Richard Crowley woke to the sight of one parked directly across from his driveway. His stomach twisted. He staggered to the window, breath fogging the glass. For the first time in his life, the king of Oak Ridge felt powerless. Still, he tried to convince himself it was nothing. They're just bluffing, he muttered. He wouldn't dare. But deep down, Richard knew Marcus Henderson wasn't bluffing. By mid-morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. Groups gathered on porches, phones in hand, whispers rising. Word had spread. Something big was about to happen. And then, at 11 o'clock sharp, the Hendersons made their move. Marcus walked out of his home, Angela at his side, Jamal just behind. He wasn't wearing his FBI badge, but his presence carried more weight than any uniform could. Calm, steady, deliberate. He led his family to the center of the cul-de-sac where the neighbors had gathered. Richard, red-faced and defiant, stormed out of his own house across the street. What is this circus? He barked. You think you can humiliate me in my own neighborhood? Marcus turned slowly, eyes locking on Richard. His voice was calm, but it carried across the crowd. No, Richard, I think you've humiliated yourself. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Marcus raised a folder, thick with documents. This isn't about opinion. This isn't about rumors. This is fact. Richard Crowley has stolen from you for years. HOA funds, kickbacks, false invoices. Every one of you has paid for his greed. He handed copies to Susan, who passed them into the crowd. Neighbors flipped through the papers, eyes widening, murmurs growing louder. Richard's face went pale. That's fake. Lies. He forged those. But Marcus wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. A voice recording played through a small speaker. Richard's voice, clear as day. You think I'm scared of him? That man doesn't belong here. Neither does his kid. And I don't care if he runs the FBI. I'll make sure everyone knows it. The crowd erupted. Shouts, gasps, disbelief. Richard's own words hung in the air like poison. A neighbor yelled, "You attacked a child." Another shouted, "You stole from us." Richard's chest heaved, sweat dripping down his temple. They're twisting this. Don't you see? They're all against me. But even his loyalists were backing away now. Eyes darting, faces tight with shame. And then, the sirens came. Two black SUVs rolled in, lights flashing. Not the local police this time, but federal agents. They stepped out in crisp suits, their movements precise, professional. Richard stumbled back. What is this? Marcus's voice was steady as stone. This is justice. The lead agent pulled out a warrant. Richard Crowley, you are under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and assault. Gasps tore through the crowd. Cameras clicked. Phones recorded. Richard's knees nearly buckled. No, this isn't happening. You can't do this to me. This is my neighborhood. Mine. The agents moved in, cuffing his wrists behind his back. Richard twisted, struggling, spitting venom. You set me up. You think you're better than me? You don't belong here. Marcus stepped closer, voice low but sharp enough for everyone to hear. I belong anywhere my family is safe. And you? You don't belong in anyone's neighborhood. As Richard was shoved into the SUV, the neighborhood erupted, not in chaos, but in applause. The sound rose like thunder, clapping hands and cheers echoing off the houses. For the first time, the community wasn't divided. They were united. Angela slipped her hand into Marcus's, tears glistening in her eyes. Jamal stood a little taller, pride swelling in his chest. For the first time since the attack, he felt safe. But Richard wasn't finished. As the SUV door closed, he shouted one last desperate warning through the window. This isn't over. You'll regret this, Henderson. All of you will regret this. His voice was swallowed by the roar of the engine as the SUVs pulled away. And just like that, the king of Oak Ridge was gone. The street was quiet again. Neighbors stood stunned, holding the papers Marcus had given them, shaking their heads in disbelief. Some whispered apologies to Angela. Others approached Jamal, telling him they were proud of his courage. Marcus simply stood tall, scanning the faces, letting the silence settle. He didn't need to say more. The truth had spoken for itself. That night, the Henderson family sat around the dinner table. No documents, no plans, just food, laughter, and relief. Angela raised her glass of iced tea. To justice. Jamal grinned. To never giving in. Marcus lifted his glass, eyes steady. To dignity. Always. They clinked glasses, the sound sharp, clear, victorious. But in the back of Marcus's mind, he knew this wasn't the end. Richard's words echoed like a shadow. This isn't over. And Marcus Henderson never underestimated a desperate man. The morning after Richard's arrest, Oak Ridge Estates woke up to silence. The man who had once dominated every HOA meeting, every block party, every whispered conversation was gone. His house sat dark and empty, blinds drawn, a for sale sign already rumored to be on its way. But the neighborhood was anything but calm. On porches and sidewalks, residents gathered in small knots, voices low but urgent. Some clutched copies of the evidence Marcus had released. Others replayed the videos on their phones. Richard screaming as he was cuffed, Marcus's calm voice cutting through the chaos. For the first time in years, people weren't afraid of Richard. They were afraid of what they hadn't seen until now. The truth. At the Henderson house. The doorbell rang before breakfast. Angela opened it to find Susan standing there again, this time with 3 other board members. Their faces were pale, eyes downcast, guilt etched into every line. "Mrs. Henderson," Susan began softly, "we came to apologize. To all of you." Angela folded her arms, studying them carefully. Another board member, an older man with gray hair, cleared his throat. "We knew Richard was difficult, controlling, but we didn't know the extent of what he was doing. We should have spoken up sooner." Angela's voice was firm. "You let him bully us. You let him attack a child." The man flinched. "You're right, and we'll carry that shame. But we're here to make it right. Richard's gone. We'll step down, every one of us, if that's what the community wants. But please, don't think we're all like him." Angela's gaze softened slightly, though her tone stayed sharp. "You want to make it right? Protect the families in this neighborhood. Make sure no one like Richard ever holds power again." Susan nodded quickly. "We will." From behind Angela, Marcus's deep voice filled the doorway. "We'll hold you to that." The board members nodded, their relief obvious, and left quietly. Later that day, Marcus took Jamal for a walk around the neighborhood. People stopped them on the sidewalk, some embarrassed, some apologetic, others grateful. One woman pressed Jamal's hand gently. "You're very brave, sweetheart. What he did to you was wrong, but you stood tall. You made us see the truth." Jamal managed a small smile. "Thank you, ma'am." As they walked further, Marcus noticed the shift in the air. Where once eyes had narrowed, now they softened. Where once whispers cut like knives, now they carried words of respect. But beneath it all, Marcus felt something else. Unease. It wasn't just Richard's words that haunted him. "This isn't over." It was the message on his phone. He wasn't alone. That evening, Marcus sat alone in his study, scrolling through case files on his laptop. Richard Crowley was in federal custody, but loose ends dangled like threads waiting to unravel. The financial records showed more than just personal greed. Hidden within the whole transactions were payments that didn't add up, large sums funneled to shell companies, contractors who didn't exist, names Marcus recognized from other investigations. Angela walked in quietly, placing a cup of coffee beside him. "You're still digging?" Marcus nodded, eyes fixed on the screen. This wasn't just Richard playing hold tyrant. He was part of something bigger. And if I've learned anything in this job, it's that men like him never act alone. Angela's brow furrowed. "You think others were involved?" Marcus's voice was steady. "I know it." Meanwhile, in a dingy motel on the edge of town, Richard sat on the edge of his bed, hands cuffed in front of him. He hadn't been booked yet. Agents were holding him for transfer. Across the room, another man sat in a chair, arms crossed. His face was hidden in shadow. "You talk too much," the man said quietly. "You were supposed to keep it clean." Richard's voice cracked. I didn't know he was FBI director. How was I supposed to know?" The man leaned forward, eyes cold. "Ignorance doesn't protect you. And now, you've dragged all of us into the light." Richard swallowed hard. "I can fix this. I'll deny everything." "I'll." The man cut him off with a sharp shake of his head. "No, you won't fix anything. You're finished." Richard's face went white. The man stood, pulling on a black jacket. "But don't worry. We'll handle Henderson, one way or another." And with that, he walked out, leaving Richard trembling in the stale motel air. Back in Oak Ridge, Jamal sat at his desk, writing in a notebook. His young hand scrawled slowly, carefully. When people think they're bigger than the rules, that's when they fall. "I don't want to be like Richard. I want to be like my dad." He closed the notebook and smiled faintly, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. Angela peeked in, watching her son. Her heart ached with both pride and worry. She knew Marcus was right. This wasn't over. But at least Jamal had his dignity back, and that mattered more than anything. That night, as Marcus locked up the house, He caught sight of something in the shadows across the street. A car parked under a tree. Engine off. Windows tinted. He stared for a long moment. The car didn't move. Angela's voice called from inside. "Marcus? Everything okay?" He forced himself to nod, though a sneeze rippled through him. "Yeah, just fine." But his gut told him otherwise. The war with Richard Crowley was over. The war with whoever stood behind him was just beginning. The days following Richard's arrest were a strange mix of calm and tension. On the surface, Oak Ridge Estates began to heal. The neighborhood was quieter, friendlier. The whole board, now without Richard, called an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to dissolve its current leadership. They announced new elections, promising transparency, open books, and a community that listened to its residents. For the first time in years, people smiled at each other across fences. Lawns weren't inspected with suspicion. Neighbors knocked on doors not to complain, but to check in. And at the center of it, Jamal felt something he hadn't in a long time: peace. One afternoon, Jamal rode his bike through the cul-de-sac. A group of kids waved him over. "Hey, Jamal, you want to play?" It was such a small thing, an invitation. But Jamal's heart swelled. For weeks he had felt like an outsider, targeted, humiliated. Now, the same kids who once avoided him because of Richard's rumors wanted him on their team. "Yeah," Jamal said with a grin. "I'm in." As the game unfolded, laughter rang across the street. Angela watched from the porch, tears of relief stinging her eyes. For all the danger swirling around them, at least her son was finding his place again. Meanwhile, Marcus was tying up loose ends. He met with federal prosecutors downtown, handing over every document, every recording, every statement Susan and others had provided. The case against Richard was airtight: embezzlement, fraud, and now, obstruction. But Marcus didn't relax. As he left the courthouse, his phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. This time, it was just a sentence. Crowley was never the head, only a pawn. Marcus stopped cold on the courthouse steps. He read it 3 times, his jaw tightening. Whoever was behind this wasn't just taunting him. They were telling him the truth. Richard was a bully, a thief, a bigot. But he wasn't clever enough to orchestrate shell companies and complex financial schemes on his own. Someone else had been pulling strings. And that meant someone else still had their eyes on the Hendersons. That night, Marcus shared the message with Angela. Her face blanched. "A pawn? Marcus, does that mean there's more of them? More like him?" Marcus nodded grimly. "Yes, and I intend to find out who. But right now, we need to focus on protecting Jamal." Angela's hands trembled as she clasped his. "That photo they sent. Marcus, they're watching him. Our son." Marcus squeezed her hand. "I know, and that's why I've taken steps. I've got 2 of my most trusted agents watching the house, unmarked. Jamal won't take a step without protection nearby." Angela exhaled, relief mixed with fear. "I just want him safe." Marcus's eyes hardened. "He will be, I promise." The next day, Susan knocked again, this time with an unexpected proposal. "Marcus," she began nervously, "the board wants to nominate you as interim president, at least until the new elections." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Me? You want me running the whole?" Susan nodded. "You've proven you care about justice, about fairness. People trust you. After what we went through, we need a leader who won't abuse power." Marcus almost laughed. "I already have a full-time job protecting the country." Susan smiled faintly. "Maybe that's exactly why you'd be the right fit, even if it's temporary." Marcus shook his head. "I didn't fight Richard to take his seat. I fought him to end the abuse. The HOA doesn't need another strongman. It needs accountability, transparency. I'll help guide you, but I won't sit in that chair." Susan's expression softened. "Then help us build something better." Marcus extended his hand. "That I can do." That evening, the Hendersons gathered with a small group of supportive neighbors for a community dinner. Angela cooked her famous baked chicken. Others brought sides: and laughter filled the house. It felt almost normal. For the first time in weeks, people weren't talking about Richard. They were talking about kids, school, the upcoming fall festival. Jamal sat proudly at the table, telling his story. When he pushed me, I felt like nothing. But my dad showed him I wasn't nothing. I mattered. We all do. The room fell quiet, every adult hanging on the boy's words. Then, applause. Loud, heartfelt, sincere. Angela's eyes brimmed with tears. Marcus placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder. Out of the mouths of babes, one neighbor whispered. But even as the warmth of community filled the room, Marcus's instincts wouldn't rest. Later, as guests left and dishes were cleared, Marcus stepped outside for air. The night was still, crickets chirping, the faint smell of barbecue lingering. He scanned the street. At first, nothing. Then, movement. A shadow near the tree line. A figure slipping into a car. The engine roared softly before the vehicle disappeared down the road. Marcus's jaw tightened. They were still being watched. He pulled out his phone, typing a message to one of his agents. Tighten the perimeter. They're here. Back in his study, Marcus opened the message thread again. He stared at the words. Crowley was never the head, only a pawn. The weight of it pressed heavy on his chest. He won the battle, but the war was only beginning. The house was quiet, but no one inside truly slept. After the chilling message with the laser sight photo, Marcus had doubled the perimeter security. Agents rotated shifts outside. Surveillance drones swept the air. Motion sensors were hidden in hedges. From the outside, the Henderson home looked like any other suburban house. But in reality, it was now fortified. Angela hated it. I don't want to live in a fortress, Marcus. I just want to live in peace. Marcus's face was firm. Peace comes after we face the storm, not before. The next morning, Jamal shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. He'd overheard his parents arguing in hushed tones the night before. For a kid his age, the weight of danger was heavy, but he carried himself with surprising calm. As he ate his cereal, he looked up at his dad. Dad, why do people like Richard get away with stuff for so long? The question hung heavy in the air. Angela froze, hand on the coffee pot. Marcus sat down across from his son, his eyes steady. They get away with it because too many people stay quiet, Marcus said. Because they use fear to keep others in line. They make people think speaking up won't matter. Jamal frowned. But it did matter. You stood up. Mom stood up. Even I did. Marcus reached across the table, resting his hand on Jamal's. Exactly. That's the lesson, son. Power only wins when good people stay silent. But when we speak, when we act, the truth gets out. And the truth is stronger than fear. Jamal's eyes brightened a little. So I did the right thing, even when it hurt? Marcus smiled softly. Especially then. Later that day, Marcus was invited to speak at a community gathering. The neighbors wanted closure, reassurance, and above all, leadership. The small park in the center of Oak Ridge was packed. Families sat on folding chairs. Children played near the swings, and the air carried a mix of barbecue smoke and late summer heat. Susan stood at the microphone first. Her voice trembled slightly as she addressed the crowd. We've lived under Richard Crowley's shadow for too long. We let fear rule us. But thanks to the Henderson family, we saw the truth. And now, it's time to build a neighborhood based on trust, fairness, and respect. Applause echoed through the park. Then Susan turned, gesturing to Marcus. And I think the man who showed us that truth deserves the next word. Marcus stepped up, Jamal and Angela standing behind him. He looked out over the crowd, not just neighbors, but people from nearby communities who had come after hearing about the scandal. His voice carried steady, strong. I didn't come here to lead your neighborhood. I came here to protect my family. But in doing that, I realized something. None of us can live in peace if injustice is allowed to grow right next to us. Whether it's in HOA abusing power, or a system that protects the powerful while crushing the weak. Silence is what lets it survive. The crowd leaned in. Marcus's eyes swept over them. Richard Crowley thought he could attack a child and walk away clean. He thought his power made him untouchable. But you proved him wrong. Because the truth is, when people stand together, no man, no matter how powerful, can hold them down. The applause this time wasn't polite. It was thunderous. Angela placed her hand on his arm, pride glowing in her eyes. Jamal beamed, his chest puffed out. For the first time, Marcus felt the community wasn't just surviving Richard's reign. It was growing stronger from it. That night, Jamal sat in his room, writing in his notebook again. What happened to me hurt, but it also showed me something. My dad says dignity is about standing tall even when someone tries to push you down. That's what I want to remember. Not the fear, but the strength. He closed the notebook and slipped it into his drawer. For him, the legacy of this battle wasn't Richard Crowley. It was the lesson of resilience. But even as peace slowly returned, Marcus knew the storm wasn't gone. In his study, he reread the string of anonymous messages. The words pawn, and next time we won't miss replayed in his mind. Whoever was behind this had resources, patience, and reach. Angela entered quietly. You can't carry this all on your own, Marcus. Let the Bureau handle it. Marcus shook his head. I am the Bureau, Angela. And if this thing is bigger than Richard, then it's not just about us anymore. It's about every neighborhood, every family, every community that gets bullied by men who think they're above the law. Angela placed her hands on his shoulders, steady but worried. Then promise me something. Promise me that while you're fighting for the world, you won't forget to protect us. Marcus looked at her, eyes firm but tender. You're not just part of the fight. You're the reason for it. The Hendersons went to bed that night feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. They had won a victory. They had taught their son the meaning of dignity, justice, and courage. The community had been freed from Richard's grip, but the legacy of this fight was only beginning. The lesson was clear. Justice could win, but only if people were willing to risk everything to demand it. The call still echoed in Marcus's ears long after the line went dead. You took our pawn. Now face us. He knew the war wasn't over. But for tonight, as he sat in his living room, he looked at the faces that mattered most, Angela and Jamal, and realized something. No matter what storm was coming, they weren't afraid anymore. They had faced down Richard Crowley. They had exposed his corruption. They had turned fear into strength and silence into courage. And for Marcus, that was the legacy of this fight. The next day, the Henderson family walked through the neighborhood. Children rode bikes. Parents chatted in driveways. The same people who once looked away when Richard barked orders now waved, smiled, and offered warm greetings. Susan stopped them by the park, holding out a small card. It's for Jamal, she said gently. Jamal took it, opening it slowly. Inside were signatures, dozens of them, from neighbors, classmates, even parents he barely knew. Each message was short but heartfelt. You're stronger than he'll ever be. Thank you for showing us what courage looks like. Never forget you matter. Jamal's eyes shimmered. He whispered, I didn't know they cared. Angela pulled him close. They do, baby. Sometimes people just need someone to remind them how. That evening, Marcus sat Jamal down. Son, he began, there's something I want you to carry with you forever. What happened to you wasn't your fault. Richard tried to make you feel small because that's what men like him do. But what matters isn't how he saw you. It's how you see yourself. Jamal nodded slowly. I see someone strong,